Fighting foreclosure, fighting the bank, and actually winning. Who is that masked man? In what is becoming almost a series called I Can't Believe We're Still Discussing This, for 15 minutes in fact, once again, we're brought back to a storyline that just won't go away. And that's the narrative of the homeowner as victim, banks as the villain, and the ongoing foreclosures that are happening all over the country almost all the time. And few of these stories end up happy. Today we're going to interview a man who successfully reversed the roles of the banks and himself. They became the victims, and he is, in their eyes, the villain. So if he's a villain, we need many more such bad folk like him. And I hope that those of you out there who would like to emulate that will listen in very carefully. The person I'm talking to is Martin Walden, a resident of California, and from his resume, I can understand why a bank would not want to take him on. Former U.S. Army First Lieutenant, platoon leader with Viet Nam experience, a revenue agent with the IRS, currently a major Facebook page manager for Mortgage Resistance of America, Student Loan Resistance Movement, and Big Pharma Resistance. Welcome to the show today, Marty.
Hi, Jerry.
Happy to have you here. Marty, I believe that our listeners need to know a little bit more about your bank up and your background to establish a frame of reference. I mean, maybe not everybody can do what you did and what you're capable of doing. And I've already provided some details, but not the most important ones. So, taking that cue, tell us about yourself and how you got into real estate and how you got into hot water and how you cooled it off.
Well, what it is out here in California, real estate is a mantra. You can't lose with it, any place in California. And especially along the coast, but the cost of living, the housing is way too high down there. So I like to ski, so I moved up into by Sacramento area, went to Sacramento State College, and graduated in 1962. And then I'm currently living up in here in the foothills, right above the gold country, as they say, right on the, I can float down. You can float down from the Coloma, where the James Marshall discovered gold, right to my house. And I live the development is right on the last surviving part of the Coloma Trail, where the James Marshall carried that gold nugget down. It goes right in front of my house to Sutter's Mill. But anyway, beautiful place. But anyway, what happened was I'm an entrepreneur, and I hit it big time. I got into a business and figured out how to do it with direct mail marketing, and I was making a ton of money. And then I figured that I needed we ended up having to spend more time trying to find tax shelters than we did running the business, my partner and I. So at the time, it still is, the best tax shelter you get is a house, because you get $500,000 of free capital gains. The first $500,000 if you're married of increase in your house profit is non-taxable, and then you get to write off the taxes and interest. I figured, well, I mean, it's a no-brainer, So, and it was actually just my wife and I, and then her at the time 97-year-old mother-in-law, and so he says, well, let's just move on up to the ritzy part of the Sacramento metropolitan area, and I basically either bought this big house, which is overkill, it's like 5,000 square feet on an acre, and then or else Uncle Sam would just take it in the state of California, just take it in taxes. So that's why he ended up here. All this thing, the real estate bubble started to collapse. I was trying to sell my house for $3 million. I owed the mortgage was $1.4 million, roughly at the time about $1.6 million. I was getting all these calls from all these real loan brokers how to refinance my loan to a better rate and everything. And all of a sudden, and I refinanced it in September 2004, and then I was about 2006. I was trying to sell. I didn't need it anymore. My mother-in-law died, so I was trying to sell the house for $3 million. See what happened, and then everything just collapsed. And I got this call from this guy says, "Look, I do loan mods." He's from Irvine, and he says, and I'm sort of where what was going on. It was the Washington Mutual loan. So I said, Washington Mutual's on the rocks, and the feds are going to shut them down, and they can't take any bad loans. So he says, I can work a loan mod with you, and he says I can get it down to there's basically the original loan amount. I said, what do you owe on it? I says the original loan is 1.3. I'll get it down to 1.3, and he says at 2% interest. But I was already down to about a 3% with a treasury bond related to a treasury bond. So I said, well, I like the idea, and I said, see if you can pull it off. By some proof. He couldn't prove it, that he could do it, And then I says, well, geez, I remember what J. Paul Getty had said. If you owe the bank $100, you got a problem. If you owe them $100 million, they got the problem. And this was what Donald Trump used back to keep his real estate back in Manhattan when he was the real estate bust in Manhattan in 1990, that the banks couldn't foreclose on him. They had to work it out because the feds would have stepped in and closed down the banks. So then I said, remember that strategy? And I says, well, I'm going to use the same thing with Washington Mutual. And so then I thought about just trying to link up a lot of people who had Chase loans, all right. And then within a week after that, the feds came in and basically gave Washington Mutual $308 billion in assets for $1.9 billion. So my house, basically, they got it for $8,600. So I says, this changes the dynamics of the whole ball game, because Chase is big time, They're not Washington Mutual. They're one of the two.
Okay, hold on. We have a scenario of very bad people here. We have the bank, which went upside down on you, which was acquired by Chase, which is the supervillain of all time. And I'm speaking from not personal knowledge, but as much as the knowledge as anybody can have by reading the newspapers. So this was happening to them. You're looking at this as not an opportunity rather than a problem. Now, so tell me how that came about and how you managed to keep your houses without paying the mortgage.
Well, my income declined from my business to the business in competition, and I really didn't need this big house. So anyway, I live in this development where there's right around these are big houses, mansions, 5,000 feet up and on acreage, and I had this house around the corner, and the guy down below, and they're in real estate. Sort of, I framed houses down in the Bay Area, those ticky-tacky little houses back in Daly City, back in going through college in the early 60s. And I've seen it go up and up and up, So anyway, so I think this guy says, so I'm just going, I've never seen this increase happen. It went on for 7 years. It usually goes up for about 2 years and planes off and goes down about 10%, and then it goes up about 20. And I said, this went up for 7 years, and it kept climbing up at a steeper graph. And I go, holy Toledo! So you just go and the stock market was terrible. And I says, well, I need investment, and I had this big house, and I bought another house down on the Intercoastal in Sarasota, Florida. And so then I said, for investment, I said, but it just kept going up and up. I says, this is what's going on here. And all of a sudden, bam, that's the only game in town. I just couldn't believe it. As well, I jumped on board with the house in Florida. Then all of a sudden, it just collapsed, just like boom, And I was trying to sell my house, and I go, I just can't, it was getting no offers. I lowered it to $2 million. And then nobody was looking at it. And then I looked at all my neighbor's house. Nobody was selling anything, And then there was a guy around the corner I knew sort of vaguely when I was a homeowner association who had this rental property. And we were trying to, we had the same realtor, so we sort of linked up a promotion together. And then I says, well, Gordon, I says, what is going on here? I just can't figure this out. He says, well, I'll tell you about what's going on. And he happened to be an undersecretary of commerce under Ronald Reagan. And then he did a macro real estate consulting, had a MBA from Berkeley, a certified engineer, really a sophisticated guy. And he says this is one of many houses he owned as a developer, and he says he fell into his house by a weird story. But he says, I'll tell you what's going on here, Marty. He said, Wall Street, Washington, and they control everything, and they rig this system for these housing prices to sell, to collapse. And he told me about collateralized mortgage obligations and how securitization and how they were paying off the rating agencies to give these bonds that they're fostering off the pension. But it's a whole story.
Okay. As you're climbing out of the mess, you talked to a former undersecretary under Reagan to find out from his lips anyway, that this was a rigged game. And then when you take a look at all the money schemes of collateralizing these fake loans, sold to people who, except in your case, could not afford them easily, or when circumstances changed, all of a sudden could not afford them. You're looking at one of the biggest scams of all time. Now, is this affecting you at all in your political agenda? I mean, were you always the person who said the government or free enterprise is what counts? What was your initial personal take on this?
Well, I'm a capitalist. I'm the von Mises School and the Austrian School of Economics, and I believe in capitalism, even though it gets complex, because you have outside competition from overseas and stuff, So anyway, a lot of it was just basically of survival. I was in survival mode because all of a sudden the thing collapsed so far down from having $600 of equity in my house to having zero. And my house in Florida went from $550 was down to, within a year, was down to like $200,000, and I owed $450 on it. And so I says I was stuck. Nothing was happening. There was nobody coming through these houses. And so I says, well, I've got to do something. And this guy told me, he says, look, the banks are, I know how they work. They cook the books, and they're going to carry your loan, this whole thing. And he has a graph. I have it in my office right now, how the real estate's going to pan out in my area for 10 years. And he says, you'd be a fool to pay on your mortgage. And he says, you've got to play the game and throw it back on them. And they can't, it's going to be a big political scandal anyway, what's going to happen, because things got really bad now. And so he said, you've got to, he says, I haven't paid on my mortgage. This was a rental house. He couldn't sell because of the type of lawsuit when he knew he should have sold, And so he said, I haven't paid on my mortgage for a year. And he says, but the banks, is the Bank of America, says, and I offered a reasonable offer to, I'll keep up the property and we'll sell it and split the profit. But he said, I could take it. They don't care, And so he said, you can do what you need to do was hang in there. And he says, don't pay and see what develops.
Okay. He's telling you to just stay put and hang in there and see what develops. Now, is that the story that was used on every single person who identifies with you right now as having been underwater? Or was this sort of like, just between you and me, this is what you need to do? How did that come across?
Well, my neighborhood, I deal with some pretty sophisticated investors,
Well, that's the point that I'm making here.
Yeah.
You were surrounded and fortunate to have, in addition to yourself, some very sophisticated investors. Now, somebody in a tract home in a suburb of Sacramento whose house went from $500,000 down to $200,000, still, we're talking about the same thing that happened to him, but what separates what he may have done to what you did?
Well, because I got an early on inside scoop from this guy on what's really going on. And then I read a bunch of books, such as The 13 Bankers, $2 Trillion Meltdown, The Big Short, the ultimate of the epic tome on how central bank and the big banks work is The Creature from Jekyll Island by J. Edward Griffin. And 600 pages worth, and so he says, well, this is how it's really going on.
Okay, so that sets the stage for me.
Yeah.
You got smart, you listened to people, you read books, and you decided that you were going to sit in your house and outweight the banks, but apparently it takes more than that.
Well, what happened, all of a sudden I says, so they foreclosed on my house, put a tactical foreclosure notice on my door, And then I got a notice. Chase sent me a loan mod, a temporary one out of the blue. They said, we don't want to take your house. And they put a full-page ad in the Chicago Tribune. Said, we don't want to take your house. We want to work with you. And they said, you make this temporary 3 months payments over this, and we'll give you a permanent modification under the HAMP program.
Everybody was offered the HAMP program who qualified in some fashion. So this is your first entry into that world then.
Right. And my payments for 3 months were $754, which is normally it's $5,000 time because it was a leveraged mortgage. So anyway, but I should have been paying about $6,000, And they said, just pay $754 for 3 months, and we will give you a permanent modification. And so I immediately went down and made out a money order and sent it to them, certified mail. They took that, okay. But I knew I was not eligible for a HAMP program because the HAMP program stopped it, capped out at $750,000 on a mortgage. My mortgage, the original mortgage, is $1,330,000. So I says, I know I was never eligible, but I'll stall it around and live here, and cheat, and see what develops. So I did that, and in 3 months, fill out the loan mod application. I never really completed one because I knew it would be rejected. And so stalled that around for about I did 7 loan mods, all right. And they took them, but this guy said, what Chase wants to do is they're going to say you book-to-book accounting, and they carry your mortgage on as your valuation of your house at $1.9 million, even though it's only worth, let's say, $900,000 now. But they don't want to foreclose on it and take. So it all depends on when they want to take the loss. So they want to look good to the government and everybody else.
I can tell that you are an encyclopedia of information on this.
Yeah.
So what I do understand, if you can collapse the information on this for me and the listeners, you basically became a very strategic squatter,
right?
/ freeloader, not paying on your mortgage, and on top of all that, have been successful at it. And now it's your intention to see that the Federal Reserve is abolished. So how do you tie all this together?
Well, if you read The Creature from Jekyll Island, it really goes into the history of the Federal Reserve Bank, and they are the root cause of all evil in the United States. And they're not a bank, and they're not a federal government agency. They're just a cartel of bankers who have a scam they developed. And they're the ones who think of all these things and fund them, because if you look on a let's say a dollar bill, it doesn't say a U.S. dollar, it says a Federal Reserve note. They control all the money and money policy, and as Rothschild put it, he says, I care not who makes the laws of a country, it's who controls the money. And that's the Federal Reserve Bank, which is the too big to fail banks. Jamie Dimon is CEO of Chase, the largest bank in the world, bank in America at least, and he's chairman of the New York branch of the Federal Reserve Bank, which is the only one that really matters. So anyway, they control everything, this policy, and talk about the ultimate inside job. They know what they're going to do, and they do it.
As a self-proclaimed capitalist, do you have slightly mixed emotions about Jamie Dimon?
If the government and the taxpayers weren't always bailing him out, when you say bail him out, they don't have to bail him out. That's just show money is created by the Federal Reserve, and money is created so easily. Now it's a dollar isn't even worth the money it's printed on. But it's not even printed on money. That's just for a little show for the peasants to look at. It's digitized.
You intrigue me because I can't quite figure out where you fit, because everything you're saying makes you sound anywhere ranging from a freeloading mortgage not payer to a Tea Party, let's bring down the government, to an occupier who says that Wall Street is corrupt. You seem to be all over the place on that.
No, I'm not, because the government it's crony capitalism. You've got the government bailing out some fat cats. There's this way in the farm industry and the food industry, like Monsanto, and you have the military industrial complex. They're wired into all the money they want. And if the government would get out of this, because basically everything is with our money is created, it's all backed up by the taxpayers. Basically, you always play the game of inflation. You just print up more money, and that solves your problem. Eventually it's going to collapse. If the government would get out of business, fine. And out of banking, that's what they should do.
So if they got out of banking, that would allow Jamie Dimon to do what?
He would allow Jamie Dimon to fail, Chase to go under. They never have a bottom line, because they can always, and you read this book on Creature from Jekyll Island, how money is created. And you realize they just create more of it and give it to them. They're essentially give it to themselves, and then they devalue the dollar. That's the way the game is played.
Oh, okay.
So anyway.
You've given us some great insight. Number one, you mentioned books that are very, very important, and I suggest that our listeners pick up and read, even though it's going to be in retrospect that they'll see what has happened. You have an IRS background, some experience. Did that help you any in understanding what was going on?
Really, it was a real eye-opener. I worked for him as a revenue officer, in collecting money, back taxes, and finding people who were defrauding the government, tax cheats, I guess you call them. And it was surreal. I mean, what I'm seeing there is they got this tax code that is, well, now it's 20,000 pages long. That hardly anybody can decipher. It's 3.8 million words. And they were complaining back when I worked back in the early 70s about it being too long and too confusing. Now it's 3 times as long, and they were going to condense it down. So anyway, for them to even begin to make it, enforce these tax laws with hardly anybody can understand, they needed, like, we should increase our 100-fold the number of IRS agents and collection agents. And then on top of that, they came in one day and they said to us, oh, President Nixon wants to fight inflation, so he's initiated price controls. And this is back in 71. Boss called us all in the office and he says, and he says he's appointed us to enforce these price controls. And I'm going, are we crazy? And he said, so now we're going to, we've established a bank of people to call in if somebody has, to report a price of something being raised. The price of everything in the United States is frozen as of this morning. I'm going, are we nuts, And I remember I got called out. He said, okay, here you go. And someone comes, someone called in. They had a tube of toothpaste went up at a little mom and pop drugstore an hour drive away for 5 cents. And he told me to go out there and strong-arm the guy, to roll it back and find out what's going on here, why he's breaking the law to store it.
Okay, I can see how that distressed you, coming into the middle of the insanity that's sometimes called the bureaucracy of government. But let's bring the thing home now. I want to know that out there are people that are they're underwater, they're being foreclosed on, and to complete the theme of this show, which is this is how do you protect yourself. What advice can you give these people? What is it that you did any differently that they need to do now?
I became aware of, when I started this Mortgage Resistance of America, it really started out to be to build a union of homeowners, of mortgage holders, to negotiate en masse with the banks. Well, now we got Chase, and basically the too big to fail. It all ended up in the hands of too big to fail. And so it's amazing how, well, one thing, worst comes to worst, you can always file bankruptcy and get it dismissed in 10 days or so and file it again, or just file bankruptcy and that'll usually drag it out for a year. All depends on how complex it is. But meantime, you're pocketing this money because people don't realize when they say, well, a modification program, you have to miss a payment. And I said, at least usually 3 payments. If you miss 1 payment, your credit score goes down 100 points. And if you're closed on, it's 140 points. Big deal. Your credit is ruined, and all the other creditors raise their interest card rates, So you're screwed, and people don't know that, how the game is played, because it's all a racket between the credit rating agencies and the banks, all right? So amazing as it is, I get letters every once in a while. It'll say, no, you have this other settlement, we were wiping out another $100,000 of your mortgage, and then I had a house in Florida. They haven't done anything, And in 5 years, well, I haven't paid for 5 years, and they haven't done anything in 4.5 years, as far as, because they admit they couldn't find any documentation on it when they foreclosed on me.
Which, of course, is a good thing to point out, and that is to make sure anybody who's being foreclosed on, you have to go back to the bank say, show me documentation that you actually own my home. Well,
it's interesting in the house in Florida was, they had papers they served me. I'm out here in California. It was originally Wells Fargo Bank, and then it had all these collateralized mortgage bond obligation, went on and on and on. Then it was served by the U.S. Bank, who was a servicer, so we could not find anything. And then we're going to, but we were asking the court to take our word for it that we own the house. We have any proof, but we just ask our word for it. So anyway, meantime, I just had contacted by an attorney in Sarasota County, called me up and says, hey, you have a court date for foreclosure. Tell you what, pay me $2,000, and I'll say it's a specious claim, produce a note. We did that. Never heard from the bank again in three years.
Okay, that's a good enough piece of information for me to say that, number 1, educate yourself. Number 2, stand your ground. Number 3, pay as little as possible for as long as possible. Number 4, get a good attorney. Number 5, challenge everything. So I want you to know, Marty Walden, that I'm thanking you on behalf of our listeners and our fellow citizens for the wisdom that you shared, your experience. Now, for those of you who wish to know more about Martin and his work, you can reach him by way of email. That's Walden, W-A-L-D-E-N, Martin, M-A-R-T-I-N, that's one word, at yahoo.com. Now, you also have Facebook and a website. Is that true?
Yeah, it's called Facebook. The best place is to go to Facebook. It's called Mortgage Resistance of America.
So this is Jerry Ashton, WGRNradio.com. Once again with more like 25 minutes of facts. I hope you've enjoyed it. Looking forward to hearing from all of my listeners. And look me up, of course, on the Huffington Post as Jerry Ashton.
Okay, thanks a lot, Jerry. Nice talking with you.
My pleasure.
All right,